My impression of whiskey drinkers was that they were either old and grumpy or loners, but from what you guys are telling me, I don't think that's no longer the case, huh?
Welcome to this episode of the Cool Dad Shirt Podcast.
So for today's event, we had to change the North Studio a little bit. So we left from my typical desk where I work down into the larger living room area where we've set up. The original effort had everybody with their own microphone. It was a lot of cables, a lot of stages of gain that proved to be daunting and uncomfortable and logistically impossible. So we rearranged it to a single overhead condenser mic. So we're going to get a little room ambiance, but I think that lends itself pretty well.
The studio is very comfortable, by the way. It's
Yes.
very, very posh. We appreciate it very much.
That's all fresh in from IKEA, isn't it, Rich?
I had it overnighted just for this event.
Ask our guests not to spill anything. We're going to have to return this stuff.
This is going back. Keep the tags out.
Is that what that pile of boxes was?
Yeah.
Dan's like, why am I sitting on plastic?
It's for the best anyway, though.
Yeah, with what we're doing tonight, it probably serves us well.
Perhaps. This is either going to be the funniest show ever or it's going to go right down the tubes. It remains to be seen. So looking forward to it. But anyway, so let's start the show. And many years ago, I was hanging out with my buddy Andy, who's a guitar player in Plan 9 back in the day, and he tried to get me to try some Scotch one time, and I said to myself, this is terrible. Why do people like this? I thought it was awful. But over the years, hanging out with Andy more, I came to like some of the stuff and started acquiring a taste for it. Later, he introduced me to his friend Dan, who knows lots about whiskey, and he started a whiskey club, which I later joined and got to learn a whole bunch of things. And so today in the studio, we have my buddy Andy, guitar player from Plan 9, and our friend Dan, who is all things whiskey. So welcome, guys, to the studio.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
So
Yeah, welcome, guys.
I think probably we'll start first with a definition of whiskey, because depending on how you grew up or what you did in college, you may think whiskey is one thing. I always go back to Michael Anthony in the Panama video by Van Halen holding the Jack Daniel's bass. That was kind of quintessential whiskey. It kind of goes right hand in hand with rock and roll. But Dan, whiskey is actually a lot more than just that, right?
So whiskey is a distilled spirit, made from grain and yeast and water. It can be any grain. It can be corn, rye, barley, rice. Now each country will have its own legal definition of what whiskey is. There could be aging requirements or maturation requirements as far as like what it's aged in, but it's all, and also proofing requirements. So alcohol content, what it's at when it comes off the still, it needs to be within a certain range. If it's too high, then you lose a lot of the character of whatever it was that you're distilling. So at that point, high enough, it becomes vodka.
How much do those grains modify the flavor profile?
You'll get some.
Okay.
You'll get sort of like softer sweet notes from a wheat. You'll get sort of butteriness from a corn. You'll get more spicy notes, obviously grassy notes from rye because it is a grass. Barley is barley. I don't really know how to describe it. It's got like a cereal note, something. It reminds me of like a breakfast cereal sometimes.
So that's not what's typically used to change the flavor of it. That's just a base ingredient that's required to distill it.
For Scotch whiskey, for single malt whiskey, no, it is not. For American whiskey, such as bourbon or American whiskey as a category, they do frequently use different grains to change the nature of the distillate and the flavor of the ultimate product. So bourbons have to be, in the U.S., the law states it has to be at least 51% corn. Then there's what they call the remaining percentage of grain is the flavoring grains.
I think that the question about the grain and how much that goes into the flavor profile. I know for me as slightly less expert whiskey drinker, I know that right away to me that starts to sort of frame, okay, what type of whiskey are we even talking about? Is that you can sort of taste, okay, this is an American whiskey distilled from corn, a bourbon or whatever. Versus the rye for sure. To me, it does start with that base grain of what's being distilled. It's kind of like, you guys are musicians like me, so it's kind of like when you start with a a Marshall amp with a Les Paul. It's like you can put as many effects layered on top of that, but it starts with that base of what you're dealing with.
That's actually a great analogy. And I think getting back to how it's characterized, and this is a way oversimplification, and whiskey has changed definitely in recent years. Back in the day, whiskey made in Kentucky with 51% corn was bourbon. Whiskey made in Scotland was Scotch. Whiskey made in Ireland is Irish whiskey, and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. That's a gross oversimplification, but it's all whiskey because it's made from a distilled grain.
Right.
So tonight we're doing something kind of cool. We actually have a tasting that we're going to go through as well, and we had to ship some stuff down to the Cool Dad Shirt Studios South. Yes, and Dan did an amazing job labeling these little sample bottles. He actually put the show name on it, and we're going to go through in order and try some of these out.
Do you mind, before we get there, yeah. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about that. We're 4 cool dads, and we're all wearing 4 cool dad black t-shirts.
That's true.
Exactly as the Cool Dad shirt talks about.
I hope Kara's not listening. She's going to yell at us. It's the standard uniform, yeah. But... So yeah,
it's our fall black though.
Yeah. It's fall black.
It's fall black. It's okay.
Exactly. So actually, right before we start, why don't we talk about? So Andy, what was it like getting into a whiskey club with Dan? What was that like when you started?
I think timing had a lot to do with it because we were just saying it was 11 years ago, so that was like right at the cusp of the 2010s. I think. To me, at least, from what I was observing out there, is that there was definitely whiskey was becoming more popular around that time. It was less of a sort of a fringe thing where it's like, old dads would drink whiskey.
Right.
We were all starting to become young dads at the time. So for me, that had a lot to do with it, is that I can't be drinking so much beer anymore because I have to get up with little kids. Whiskey was kind of the perfect transition to adulthood when it came to sampling some alcohol. Dan and a couple other friends of ours were attending this, I think it was on Tuesday nights at a place called 9 Maple in Saratoga Springs, New York. So I remember Dan and these couple other friends said, you know what, we're going to try to do this kind of offline and try to make a club of it because we're interested in getting to know more about whiskey and getting to sample so much more of it without completely blowing our budgets because it does get expensive. So the idea that 10 people pooling $20 or so can get that nice $200 bottle of whiskey for us all to sample rather than one person having to blow that $200 and then it maybe not even being a whiskey that you end up liking. From there, I think Dan really spearheaded, okay, guys, we're going to make a go of this. And I'd like to say the rest was probably history, but a lot went into it.
I got together a few guys that I knew had some interest in whiskey, and the mutual friend Matt mentioned that Andy was an enthusiast. So we got together and did things the hard way first.
I've dragged a few people in over the years. You're welcome, Rich.
Yeah,
and we've distilled it down to a much finer product.
Well played, Dan. That was
where we're at now.
It's a commitment, kind of like running a band or running a podcast. I'm sure.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes just to make it happen. That
in Saratoga Springs, I think there was like another whiskey club at that time, even that they had like the website and like you go on and see them at like tent events wearing blazers and stuff like that. And that's a high point of entry that at least our crowd was like, we're not getting into whiskey if that's what it means to get into whiskey. Right.
So even though it kind of became hip, it was still weird and unattainable and strange.
Well, to clarify, just to get it on the record, we did actually start first. The Saratoga Whiskey Club, which I have been a member of, and I thoroughly enjoy their what they do. They've got a great group of people with a lot of enthusiasm and deep pockets.
and it got down to the point, it's a complete formula. It's a rotating thing, goes to different people's homes, and there's a complete dinner, right? So we have a full stomach before we begin, so people aren't getting sloshed.
Yeah.
It's all part of the formula. And going back to the point that was made earlier, I've tried a couple bottles that are very expensive that I was totally not interested. I didn't like, and that's a very costly mistake on your own to make. So you could experiment by doing things like this and finding stuff that you really like. And surprisingly, you can find some really great stuff that is not crazy expensive.
Actually, what I tried to do with the lineup for tonight.
So that's a perfect segue in, Dan. Thank you. So I think at this point, we should probably try our first sampling. We're doing it live here in the studio, the three of us, and Mike will be joining us with sample number one. Dan, do you want to explain what's up first?
Sure. So what we're going to be going through tonight are Scotch whiskeys. So while there is a great wide world of whiskey from every corner of occupation in this world, I decided to just focus on one segment just because there is such variety. So I tried to get several whiskeys that are reasonably affordable, also reasonably attainable, and they also demonstrate different aspects of what can be explored within whiskey. So the first one is a blended whiskey. It's from Dewar's. It's Dewar's 12-year-old, which they recently revamped. So it is, according to their website, a blend of 40 different whiskeys of malt and grain variety. Also, to clarify, the age statement on a whiskey is not the exact age of the whiskey. It is the age of the youngest component of the blend, or whatever it is. So even a single malt is going to be a blend of whiskeys typically, unless it does say single cask or single barrel on it. You can have 2 barrels of whiskey, one that's 40 years old, one that's 10 years old. You put them together, it becomes a 10-year-old whiskey. As far as marketing
so
is
it's
concerned.
the least common denominator, the earliest, or
The youngest. That's written into the laws, so that people can't say, well, this is a 40-year-old whiskey, and then have an ounce of 40-year-old whiskey with the rest of the bottle filled up with 5-year-old. Okay. So
they have some very serious laws about this in Scotland. Everybody.
Yes, they do.
So
they're not screwing around over there, are they?
No. There's even a company called Compass Box where they got into trouble where they tried to actually list the component whiskeys that they put into the blend that they made. And since one of them was younger and one was older, they got in trouble with the Scotch Whisky Association for putting the age of the older one on the label.
Well, you're just listing it. They weren't saying
they weren't saying
it was
this
18-year-old.
Right. No, they were saying there's some of this and there's some of this, and they got into trouble for putting both of those ages on it. Anyway, back to the whiskey again. So we've got so this is as I said, a blend of 40 whiskeys, and so it's matured in a combination of refilled casks, first fill bourbon barrels, and sherry casks. And then once they blend all that together, now the new process is that they put it into first fill bourbon barrels to marry, to sort of like let the blend settle down and come together. So anyway, this is 40% alcohol by volume. This can be had in most places for around $30.
So let's take a sip, and then my palate is not very refined. I know what I like, but maybe you can explain what we would expect with the tasting of this. So let's have our sip.
And take a small sip.
You guys need to add some sound effects of somebody chugging or something.
Some soft music in the
That's almost the app. There you go. Yeah, the clinking.
So, well, what do you get from it first?
I'll add some chugging in post. Hang on, let me have another sip.
So while you're sipping over there, Rich, Dan put together a super, super nice package, fantastically labeled bottles. There was 8 bottles. They were all labeled nice with the Cool Dad Shirt podcast tasting on the label. In addition to the 8 fantastic samples, he sent over 2 nice little glasses to use for the tasting, which I believe these are called Glencairns. Is that correct, Rich?
We got that right.
Those are not actually Glencairn glasses. They are nosing glasses. They are whiskey glasses, but it is Glencairn is actual. They're a manufacturer. They designed it.
Okay.
They designed the ones that we're using here. But what you have is a perfectly acceptable nosing whiskey glass.
It's
They
very
take a
nice.
much less room than a Glencairn glass.
So thank you for sharing this and sending it down.
And Mike, I just so you know that this is commonplace for Dan's practice. He's been doing this for years with all the members of the whiskey club. Keeping it going through COVID, especially by making all those home deliveries with the same kind of care package that you received. It's awesome. We all look to Dan as kind of the guru.
Yeah,
you're
it's
welcome,
amazing.
Mike. I honestly, I do really enjoy sharing whiskey with people and trying to expose people to new experiences. So
Yeah.
I hope you find at least something you enjoy from the package there, I don't have any delusions that you're going to love all of it. But that's also why we do it. So it's, and please, you will not hurt my feelings. Even if you say you don't like any of it, it won't hurt my feelings either. Just the fact that you're trying it is what's important to me.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
It is a bit of an acquired taste. Most people, it's a little tough out of the
Oh,
gate.
yeah.
And so there's a spectrum. So we get into Scotch. It goes from kind of light and vanilla-y to some other flavors. Then it moves towards something more smoky, then more peaty. And that actually is a real acquired taste. Very few people start at the end of that spectrum and saying, oh, this is for me.
Unless you have a bottle you're trying to get rid of and you give it to your unwitting friend and unfortunately turn them off to whiskey for quite some time. But nobody in this room has done that.
Yes,
Won't mention names.
But so the first tasting here, I am not a pro at this, and I have a hard time describing this, but this is on the lighter end of the spectrum. This is a blended whiskey, so it's a little smoother and rounder. It's a lighter flavor. You're gonna press me on flavors.
I am.
Lighter in color as well.
Yeah,
compared to some of the other.
I will build off of what you said. I've heard someone describe a blended whiskey as sort of a symphony versus a single malt, which is more like a jazz trio. So you're gonna get much rounder flavors generally from a blend because it has the grain, and it usually has many different ages of whiskey in it. So you might have just like a little tiny amount of a super old whiskey that's got this really intense flavor that if you had it on its own, it might not even really be that good to you, but it just might add this little tiny little flavor, little nuance to the blend to just bring it all together.
And a little bit later, we'll talk about an infinity bottle. This came up in our previous podcast.
That's right.
When I first started talking about it. And so we'll come full circle to the infinity bottle a little bit later. So, all right, well, what should we have expected here, Dan? Or do you want to press Dan?
I need, give me a flavor. Give me something.
There's a little vanilla in there. So the lighter stuff, I do like the vanilla-y kind of stuff is where I kind of like to be. I generally I like the lighter vanilla stuff, and then I like the smoke stuff, and it depends on the day. Sometimes after dinner, I like the smoky stuff after dinner. For happy hour, I would probably move to something more like this, I would say.
Yeah, and on that note, how you approach a whiskey is going to affect how you appreciate it. If you're not in the mood to drink whiskey, you're not going to like whatever whiskey you try to drink. The same whiskey can taste different on different days to you.
Yeah, and depending if you eating food along with it before or after, or all good stuff. Like wine, it can be paired with stuff, or it has an influence. Other flavors have an influence on it. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
all right, Andy, you're up.
Well, talking about what it is we're all tasting, I feel like it's important that, especially when a newcomer might come in who doesn't have a lot of whiskey experience, is they may not know, what am I even getting myself into? What's the best way to enjoy this? And there's a huge laundry list of that too. But often Dan will try to keep it simple by saying, well, start by taking that Glencairn or nosing glass, and what is it you're getting on the nose? What is the smell that you're getting from that whiskey, the aroma? Because that starts to set your taste buds and your palate.
Right, that's going to inform the experience before you even get it into your mouth.
Yeah. And it has, and for us too, it's like we have a dinner pairing that we're having a lot of times before we even start to sample our whiskey, which starts to inform a little bit on the type of whiskey that we're having that night, whether it's a smoky one or more smooth vanilla, kind of like what we're getting out of this Dewar's 12 that we're having right now.
Which food pairing can backfire too, by the way.
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches are probably not a good option.
Often, I'm a whiskey drinker that enjoys kind of when you sip that whiskey is kind of chew on it a little bit, really kind of get a feel for it, the mouth feel, because if we all remember from middle school with the little diagram of your taste buds on your tongue.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's so many whiskeys probably hit each and every one of those different kinds of senses.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I was able to smell more than I could taste. Are you better off tasting with the front of your tongue, the back of your tongue?
Well, so mechanically, when you're tasting a whiskey, you're going to approach it differently than when you're drinking it, just casually or socially. When you're tasting it, to get the most out of it, as I said earlier, take a very small sip, like just enough to get the flavor in your mouth, like maybe 3 drops or something like that. Especially if you have no experience with it whatsoever, you don't know what it's going to be like, and then just hold it in your mouth for a moment, and then kind of, as Andy said, literally chew. So just make like a chewing, it doesn't have to be exaggerated or anything like that, but just kind of like move your jaw up and down, and it's going to move the liquid around in your mouth, around your tongue. And then another thing is also keep your mouth closed, because as soon as you open your mouth and introduce oxygen, it's going to change the chemical reactions, and which also brings on the burning flavor, the burning sensation sooner.
Okay.
Also learned in middle school.
That's interesting.
I'm glad you said that, because I think that's what I could never explain. Because when people first taste it, I think it's what happened. They sip it and they're like, "Oh my gosh!"
Yeah,
and like their throat is on fire. And the key is to keep your mouth closed. And actually, from the flavor thing, I like a big exhale as it comes out. That's where I get a lot of flavor after sipping it. Is a big exhale afterward through the nose, not through the mouth. Mouth is closed, and through the nose is where I get the flavor.
Okay.
Yeah, you kind of. I always think of it as like a sequence of 4. The note, the sight, the look of your whiskey in the glass, the nosing, the taste, and then that kind of finish, the aftertaste.
Right. So then you're gonna swallow. As I said, keep your mouth closed. Give it a moment. Let everything kind of settle. Think about what you're actually experiencing, because you're not tasting apples. You're not tasting Band-Aids, you're not tasting marshmallows, you're not tasting all these things, you're not tasting a burning corpse, you're tasting certain sort of congeners and chemicals, vanillins, things like that remind you of these things. It's an intellectual exercise as much as it is a physical experience of what it is that you're drinking. So just that, and that's the tough part. Like the very hard part. It's easy to drink whiskey. If once you can get past the consuming something that should kill you, putting words to it is difficult. That is the skill that you can develop, and anybody can develop it.
It's just
practice.
Yeah. Like anything else, you got to put some time.
Right. So, Mike, what flavors?
We got 7 more to go, so we're going to get a lot of practice in tonight.
Yeah, we'll build some speed up here. So, before we get too much further, did you get any notes? You said you smelled more than you tasted. What did you smell?
Maybe Rich influenced me, but I did smell some vanilla, and I felt like I could smell it better than I can taste it.
That is another hazard of tasting in a group, is that when you hear something, it will influence
it's in your head
what you're imagining. It isn't necessarily a bad thing. Because it invites you to think about it in a different way. But if you're trying to strictly come up with your own thoughts and like that, it can influence you.
Yeah, exactly right. You can prompt something, but also an experienced person said you should expect the following things. Like, oh, okay, yeah, I wouldn't have got there on my own, but
right.
Yes, I totally see the black currant that you speak of.
I was going to say, in being inexperienced, I don't really even know what I'm looking for, right? The next one we sample, I'll keep my mouth closed. I'll really try to chew it and see what I might identify.
So they advertise dried fruit, citrus, and vanilla for the notes. Once again, marketing. It does give you like an arena to at least imagine being in. For myself personally, like I definitely get a little bit of vanilla. I get sort of like a brown sugar smell and taste to it. I get like a nuttiness from this, maybe walnuts or something like that. Like I said at the beginning, I enjoy this whiskey for the price. I think it's easy to appreciate and enjoy, and it's
so. What would the price point be? This would be a recommended entry level, right?
So this is about just under $30 to, I've seen it up to $35, and it's 40% alcohol by volume, so it's not over the top as far as that. So you don't have to plan your day around it.
And the nice thing about this too, Andy alluded to this earlier too. When you're younger, a lot of drinking is volume. You're getting pints of beer. So even though this hobby starts getting a little bit more expensive, you got to remember you're only drinking small. It's so much flavor. You are sipping tiny amounts over a period of time. So you're not consuming quantities of whiskey.
Right. When we do the tasting group, I pour out an ounce of each whiskey as we go through for the samples. And I also I learned a while ago that as I'm going through it and presenting, that I will have a half an ounce.
Stay on your name.
So yeah, it doesn't take much. I mean, we've sat here with a half an ounce of whiskey for 20 some minutes, talked about it, and I still have some in my glass.
Yeah.
It's absolutely one of these cliches. Yeah, I have a little drop at this point because I started before you guys did while you were talking at the intro. But it's absolutely a cliche of quality over quantity for sure. And speaking from my personal whiskey journey, is that it's an easy thing to get into if you did come from a little bit of like, okay, I was a beer drinker through my younger years, and I really need to mellow out. And I don't have time for a hangover the next day.
That's right, exactly.
I need something that's going to leave me, a heck of a lot more satisfied than just that regret. And whiskey certainly does that, I think.
You're listening to the Cool Dad Shirt Podcast with Rich and Mike.
That's great. All right, let's move on to the second one and see what we got. What's up next, Dan?
So next we have Old Pulteney, 12-year-old. This is a single malt, as will the rest of them be. So this is a single malt. It's from the northeast coast of Scotland. I actually visited there on vacation to Scotland last year, and it was fantastic. This is one of my favorite distilleries, and I do really like this whiskey they have. So the 12-year-old is their entry level product. They've also got a 15-year-old, an 18-year-old, I believe.
And this smells entirely different, doesn't it?
Right.
So this is completely different smell.
So this is a 12-year-old single malt. It is aged exclusively in bourbon barrels, whereas the previous one was a mixture of bourbon barrels and sherry casks. And there's no peat to this, whereas the Dewar's does have some peated components to it. So there's a little bit of smoke in there.
I didn't even pick up.
This also is 40% alcohol by volume.
Dan, in terms of measurement, how many ounces are these bottles?
There's about 25 ounces in a bottle. I think
It's a standard 750 milliliter. Right?
Yeah, 750 milliliter, which comes out to about.
If you drink an ounce at a time,
20.
you can get like 25 drinks in.
Yeah.
I was inquiring about
Like
the
ones you
sample
said.
size.
Oh, those. I'm sorry. So those are.
I'll be like, whoa, I better slow down.
Those are 1 ounce bottles, but that will hold up to. I tried to fill them to the top so they wouldn't slosh around.
Yeah.
So there's probably between an ounce and a third ounce and a half in there.
Okay.
So, and also with the intent that you can have some tonight, try it, and then go back to it another time and see if you feel the same way or differently about any of them.
Yeah. I mean, I think Rich started to allude to just, again, there's so many fascinating things that go into the whiskey. And, I like geography is one thing. So when I look at a map of Scotland, I actually have a map that pinpoints a lot of the distilleries around the island. And even depending on where on the island of Scotland that the distillery is from, has a huge influence over, what the flavor profile or how the whiskey style is.
Right. So this distillery, it's, as I said, it's in the town of Wick, which is on the coast. It used to be a herring fishing village. Like that was their main industry, and the town itself was only accessible by sea for most of the year for quite a while. So this has a lot of salinity to it, just because the water that they use comes from right near the ocean. So that's going to filter through the ground and into their water source.
Yeah, so this one, at first smell, I got a really strong like apricot, like a dried fruit apricot. Right. That was very. Now tasting it, it wasn't quite as apricot-y, I don't think, after tasting it, but there's definitely a dried fruit component, I think, to this.
They even build themselves as the maritime malt of Scotland.
Yeah, I thought I got a little green apple.
Oh, I get the green apple,
sure. A little bit of that, the fruit, but a little more on the bitter side.
I'm not detecting any herring at all. There's no fish to taste.
That comes later with another whiskey.
They don't use any fish casks for this.
All right, Dan, what's your take on this one?
So it's on the nose initially, like you said, that there's some fruitiness to it, and I get like the sort of salinity, sort of ocean air sort of saltiness to it. I taste it, and it's a bright whiskey for me, so it's kind of like prickly on the tongue, and then it kind of settles into like a salted caramel. There's a little bit of fruitiness underneath that.
Do you get any licorice at all in this one? because I thought I got a little bit of that, and just I'm kind of going meta in my own head a little bit, is that when we have the whiskey tastings and we might have up to a dozen or probably even, I think we've had some big ones up to 20 people, that you get lots of comments around the room, and you get a lot of like really out there ones that everyone says, wow, that's just amazing that you come up with such a thing where nobody else picked up on that. It makes for a lot of really good conversation and a lot of really good dissension, I think, too, when we get into these whiskeys.
Absolutely.
Andy, do you ever feel what they're saying they might be making up?
Well, when Dan started talking about the taste of Band-Aids and burning corpses earlier, I actually didn't laugh because I've heard those things before. So.
Well, when we spoke with Dan last time, I think he referenced like burnt rubber or something based on something he had tried.
I think we're talking about Lagavulin, which it was one of my first
Dan's
favorite
laughing
whiskeys.
because he knows what.
He knows it. He bought it for him. He's like, Merry Christmas, Dan. I hope you like it.
Yeah, enjoy.
Dan's scrubbing the driveway with it.
No, that actually, strangely enough, this was the first whiskey that I had that I actually like fell in love with. I'd had plenty of Jack Daniels and Johnny Walker Black Label and Red Label and Jim Beam and your standard middle of the shelf or whatever's near the entry of the whiskey department. But I bought this bottle to share with my roommate because we were decided we're going to delve into whiskey a little deeper than we had been, and just on price point and the shape of the bottle, I picked it out, and I tasted it, and it was burnt rubber. It was burning rope. It was, but it had this gorgeous like butterscotch. It just like wove in a little bit of salinity, but it like all wove together, and it was just so well balanced and so delicious that
It was
I'm
complex
like,
and
wow.
wonderful, right?
Yeah, it all made sense to me, like because I'd had these other things that they were at best palatable, at worst awful, and then this is what I heard other people talk about, poetically speak about whiskey.
Yeah.
And it actually like came to light to me, and I'm like, oh, there could be more.
I was going to say, it's funny that burnt rope and burnt rubber is so complimentary in the whiskey world.
So before we move on to the next
this one was good.
Yeah, did you like it, Mike? I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's all
What are
right.
your thoughts?
I'll just jump in. It was definitely brighter than the last one. After a couple of moments, I could taste sort of that brightness of the apple, and that was probably the strongest flavor. And my mouth still has kind of that light, not necessarily citrusy, but like that bright apple taste to it.
I get the bright apple. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's good. Yeah, it was good.
Yeah, this one I find really develops it. Like if you keep your mouth closed after you swallow for a bit and just kind of like let it linger on your tongue, it just like the sweetness kind of opens right up.
What give us when you get into whiskey, so define like what the term neat means and why if you're on the rocks, like whiskey people don't often do rocks, they'll do like a giant rock. So give us the distinction between drinking neat and a giant rock.
I'm just going to jump in first before Dan goes. Is that before Dan goes, I'll preface that as the amazing host that he is, he always tells, especially new whiskey drinkers who might ask this question, there's not going to be a wrong way for you to partake in your whiskey drinking. Have it however you want to do it, with one exception that I'll talk about maybe later.
So neat is as it comes out of the bottle and glass. That's all you need for
Room
that
temperature,
recipe.
right into a glass.
Room
and off you go.
temperature. Yeah. So and typically when you're sampling, when you're tasting, what you want to do is start with the whiskey neat in the glass. Let it rest in the glass for a little bit. You pour it right in. And then throw it right in your face. You're gonna get all the most volatile compounds. Now that they finally have a chance to expand, they're gonna be coming right in your face. And the most volatile one, edit that out. The most volatile ones are going to be the sharpest and less pleasant.
And most flammable, probably.
And most
too.
flammable, yes. So give it a minute, and you can even like leave half a glass, come back 20 minutes later, and it will taste different than when you left it.
Kind of like letting your steak rest.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Something like
Or a wine breathe, right? You
Yeah.
can get some of that out. Yeah.
Yeah. So as far as rocks, so if you are back to sampling to tasting, if you're trying to get the most flavor out of the whiskey, trying to get the most experience of what it has to offer, then chilling the whiskey is going to detract from that. So it's going to close off. It's going to make things less volatile. It's going to make the compounds stick together more. So it's going to be more difficult for you to actually determine what the different flavors are. Mm-hmm. That said, if it's 90 degrees out and you are sitting on your back porch and you want a glass of whiskey and, sitting there, sweat's dripping off your face, go ahead and put an ice cube into whatever you got. If you decide that you've already had it, you know what it tastes like and you want it to be colder than it is, go ahead and do it. If that makes you happy, that's fine. As far as the ice cube, the giant ice cubes, the point of that is that there's less surface area, so it dilutes more slowly. So that is useful in my world for a cocktail, an old fashioned, something like that, or a highball, which are fantastic. That is another lesson I was slow to learn in this journey, is that if you use good whiskey to make a cocktail, you will have a very good cocktail. Don't just save your crappy whiskey to make cocktails. I had
save that for the company.
Right. I made a Manhattan. Well, I guess technically it's a Rob Roy with independent bottling of a 10-year-old Kalila, and it was gorgeous. It was fantastic. And so, yeah, try different things. If you like it as a whiskey, make a cocktail with it. It doesn't do you any good to leave it in the bottle.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, when they start, they put it on the rocks because you get the dilution. It's not quite as strong in your face. But hopefully, as you develop, you get to the true. If you want to pursue it, you get to develop a taste of the way it was made.
I think the rocks thing, I think that's mostly psychological.
I think it might be true too, but that's how a lot of people I see start.
Right, because I think it's people they're psychologically believing that they're counteracting the burn of the whiskey. Which in fact I've found that adding water to a whiskey, if you don't let it rest with the water in it, will actually bring the spicier elements, the hotter elements, to the fore. So at least that's my experience. When you are sampling, when you are tasting, it is strongly recommended that you do add some water to the whiskey, a drop or two at the very least, and then add more as you feel comfortable, as you feel you prefer. But that one drop will actually change the whiskey itself. It will open up the compounds, the molecules in there, and it will help separate the flavors and the aromas, and you'll actually get more out of the whiskey. With just one drop is plenty.
And so as part of you like to begin with pure neat. This is out of the bottle as it was created, and then you add some just to watch it change into.
Right. Yeah. Just taste it the way it is. See how you feel about it, and then but definitely make a point to put a drop in it and see if that changes it for you. And also in the group, like I have had people that say, well, because I asked for a rating for everyone for the whiskey. 1 through 10, something simple, just to like put, a mark on it. People will say, well, I didn't like it at first, but I put water in it, so I liked it. And with water, it's a 7. I'm like, okay, then it's a 7. Yeah. It's not a bad whiskey just because you prefer it with a dab of water in it. It's not, that doesn't mean that it's flawed.
I think a stigma comes with it too, because it can be an expensive thing. I think people see it as like high society. I think that's changing now. It's becoming super hip these days. But sometimes people will feel intimidated or, like you were saying, like defensive about the way it did. Well, I had to,
a bit of a lightweight.
Right.
Yeah.
The more I learned about like adding the water aspect of whiskey, it seems like this just really unique kind of, interesting thing. The more that you kind of learn about, well, why do we do that? And what's behind the reasons. And it's, it starts with, like Dan said, a lot of times is, I'll have a sip and just see what that whiskey's like without it. And then at the tastings, we might take like a little bottle cap of water and put a few drops in there and then swirl it around. And like Dan said, is that it might change the characteristics so much of opening up the bouquet of the whiskey a little bit, where it's a little more florally and light. And so, sometimes it's a harsher whiskey that is much more drinkable that way. But too much water and, you're way overboard. That was the one story I was thinking of. A friend one time just started pouring pouring the water in the whiskey. And that's the only time I think I saw Dan kind of admonish somebody for their whiskey drink. And not with that one. Don't do that. You're destroying it.
All right, on to number 3. What do we got next?
Yeah.
All right. Next up, we have Benromach, which is another whiskey distillery that I have a soft spot for. So this is one of the smallest commercial whiskey distilleries in Scotland. I think they're up to 3 employees now.
Are they relatives?
I don't think they're relatives. I think they're.
They call it a clan.
Okay. Oh, that's right. That's very Scottish. Yeah.
They,
Of course.
And it's actually the distillery is owned by Gordon and MacPhail, which is an independent bottler of very high quality, in my opinion. So anyway, so this is a 10-year-old. This is 43%. So we've come up a little bit in alcohol by volume. Also, a fun reminder that the difference between 43 and 40% is not 3%. It's nearly 10%.
So because as percentages build.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So which is something else, that's drinking math. It's important to pay attention to.
That's drinking math.
All of our strong subjects that we practice while we're drinking.
That's drinking math is important. Yes,
It is
to
very
not end up. So this once again, this smells entirely, completely, and totally different than the last two.
Yeah,
now
very
this-
strong.
This does
You
have
don't have to get close to this.
This has some peated barley in it, so it has a wisp of smoke. This is definitely not in the realm of some ones that we're going to have later on. This kind of goes back to a more traditional style of whiskey that was produced, hundreds of years ago, which is one of the things I love of it. And also, this is from the Speyside region of Scotland. The previous one is called a Highland on the cliffs. It's actually high up, even though it is on the coast. So
The cliffs of Dover.
I believe that's Ireland.
Other side of the UK. But yes, similar.
That's a different whiskey episode.
That's right. It's part
Also a
2.
great song by Eric Johnson. This is very tasty. Thanks, Mike. That was nice one.
Yeah, I try to drop a couple in. We'll get to Christopher Walken soon too. Hey, if I can jump in before someone blows it for me, and Dan, you can let me know if I'm close, but I do detect a little chocolate. Is that accurate?
If you taste it, it's accurate.
Andy gave a thumbs up. You catching that when you tasted it?
It's hard to get to. So I'm actually, and I don't consider myself the expert necessarily even, but that's kind of expert level if you can get through some of the nose on this one to get into that layer of chocolate beneath.
So I'm going to call you out, Mike. What kind of chocolate is it? Is it dark chocolate? Is it milk chocolate? Is it white chocolate?
I don't think it's dark chocolate. I think it's milk chocolate.
Okay. All right. See, that's the intellectual part of it, where you found a note, and then think about that note more. See, think about how it reflects in your mind. If you taste something and it reminds you of apple pie that your grandmother used to make, that's special to you, and that's important. That's a point of reference, and then you can also build on that. Well, why does it taste like that? What reminds me? Well, there's butter in apple pie. There's obviously apples. There's cinnamon. There's sugar. There's all these things. There's flour. So then you can start to tease it apart. You get to chocolate, and then you can say, well, is it a bitter chocolate? Is it a sweet chocolate? Is it a milk chocolate? And then kind of go from there, and see where it takes you. It's like a journey.
I do like the smokiness to it as well.
Yeah, this is definitely a smoky one. Yeah, which I like. This is super tasty. Like Mike, I'm getting some chocolate. I might lean a little more toward the dark chocolate, but it's tasty. The smell medicinal is not the right word because that's so. But you know what I'm saying? It's got a, I don't know the word for it, but it's
It is distinct though.
It's distinct. Yeah.
I get there's a little bit of saltiness. There's some sweet, little buttery. I get some citrus too, sort of like an orange oil. And then I do get that milk chocolate on the taste. And I get some of the orange carrying through in the spice.
The orange. Let me try that. Yeah, I'm gonna add a little water to this too, because this is strong and complex.
It is very complex. I'd like the smokiness though.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So the drummer in Plan 9, so we had a tasting in Andy's backyard over the summer. And the comment I made earlier, most people don't start out liking the smoky stuff, but maybe I'm wrong because now Mike likes this. And the drummer in our band, Jeff, he liked that the best too, I think. But then it was pointed out he's a cigar smoker, so he enjoys the thick smokiness anyway. So that was not a bad starting point for him.
See, I find that a lot of people, they fear the smokiness. Like there's lots of people like, I don't want anything smoky. I don't like that.
Okay.
But if somebody I find that when people approach things with an open mind, like there are people that you would not believe, like they don't like any other Scotch, but then they come to a smoky peaty one and they're like, wow, this is fantastic. My sister, in the last couple of years, she started to at least be interested in whiskey, which is important because she went to Scotland with myself and my wife and her husband. and so she would kind of initially gravitate, excuse me, towards fruity whiskeys, sherry cask matured whiskeys, lighter, sweeter.
More of a wine drinker.
Right. She's a wine drinker. She would drink.
Yeah.
She would drink like sweet. She liked margaritas and other sweet cocktails and things like that. But in our travels, we ended up in Skye at Talisker, specifically because I engineered that. And we went through the tour and then the tasting, and I had low expectations for how she would feel about it. And she was on board with it. She went through. She liked the Talisker 10 the best, and which is it's a smoky. It's got a lot of black pepper to it, but it has this like undercurrent of sweetness that just draws it all together. And she's like, I like that one. I'm like, that's awesome.
And that's just an open mind, like you were saying.
Right.
And I got to tell you, I added water to this. It mellowed it out. It was a little bit smoother. I thought the water changed it quite a bit.
Yeah, that's that opening up the bouquet of the flavor.
Yeah.
A lot of times, when Dan talks about the brightness of a whiskey, sometimes that can mellow out a little bit with adding the water. I like what you said about, if you have kind of a preconceived notion of like, okay, the smoky whiskey, I can't associate that with, something I'm trying to partake in as a nice relaxing drink.
Mm-hmm.
But, much like Jeff, our drummer that you mentioned, that, he has a positive association with, I've smoked cigars and I really enjoy that. Maybe it's something where you have a positive memory of being around campfire,
Okay.
or,
Right.
something like that. And, or again, the smokiness, maybe it pairs well with smoked meat that you've had. And all of a sudden you're just opening yourself up to this whole world of like, there's incredible whiskeys out there that have differing levels of smoke that may speak to your fancy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, before we get into the next one, is air an issue, or what's the shelf life for the average bottle once you open it?
It depends how much air is in the bottle. It will oxidize. It will eventually change the whiskey. It won't go bad like a wine. It's not going to turn to something else. However, some of the components will oxidize faster than others, so the balance will come off of it. Typically, the sweeter notes will sort of die off first, but it takes, I want to say, like 3 years for like a half full bottle to finally start to change. But I have seen it happen. There was a good friend of mine who's actually in the group. He's a huge Talisker fan, and he had this bottle of Talisker 57, which is fantastic bottle of whiskey. But it's high proof, lots of sherry cask influence. He was saving the last little bit. There was probably like maybe 1.5 ounces, 2 ounces in the bottle, and he saved it for so long. And then he decided he was going to finally have it. He's like, it was terrible. It was not at all the same whiskey that I had had before. He's like, it was. I said, not to jump ahead too far, but that was the impetus for me starting the infinity bottle that I have, my house bottle.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Because you can get rid of the air because you're actually filling the bottle.
Right. So I had several bottles. This goes back to my 40th birthday. I bought some bottles. There was a big party. I got some whiskeys that I wanted to share with people, and then other people brought me whiskeys as gifts. And then I found several months later, I had all these open bottles of whiskey on my shelf. And given that I have a job that I have to go to on a regular basis and a daughter that I have to tend to and other responsibilities.
So much whiskey, so little time.
Exactly. I'm like, well, this equation is not in my favor at this moment.
Yeah.
So I'm like, and I had that fear of the whiskey, just like, because they were all beautiful whiskeys, I didn't want to lose that specialness. So I'm like, I'm just going to do it. So I got a bottle. I had a bottle with a screw closure, an old Nika bottle. And I started pouring them together, and it was fantastic.
And so psychologically, it was difficult for you to do that, thinking you might ruin the specialness of these. But you said what you came up with was amazing.
Right. It was. Well, no, I was worried that if I left them in them as they were, that they would deteriorate.
Gotcha.
And so that was the drive to like, okay, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to see what happens. What I found is that if you only put whiskey in it that you like, you will end up with whiskey that you love. It's
Okay.
it's going to change. It's going to, it's never going to be the same.
Which I have more of the fear that you're alluding to, that, if I have two whiskeys that I know I love, what the hell do I know about like whiskey?
You don't want a schlub like me trying to concoct something. No,
Right.
No, that's you can't. There's no science to it whatsoever. It's the only science is
we're going to go to the whiteboard and work this out.
the only science is don't start with crap and you won't
Introducing
end with
the
crap.
subject of the
But-
evening, chemistry.
But I
So the
did-
trick
I-
is no air, right? So you want to make sure you're filled up pretty high and
Yep. So what I
decrease the
did.
amount of air.
Yep. So what I did is I filled the bottle up, and then as I thought about it, I'm like, well, I don't want to just wait till I get to the end of the next bottle to add it in, and especially if I'm trying to keep the whiskey fresh, what I'm going to do is when I open a bottle, I will top it off. That way, I'm getting fresh new whiskey in there, not old stale whiskey, and also I'm keeping it fuller rather than emptier and letting it run
That's where the
down.
word infinity comes from. It's
Yeah,
nearly
never
always
ending.
full.
Right.
Ah,
So
I'll eventually get there. I just figured that out.
Maybe after another whiskey.
So, and I did initially, I started trying to keep track of what it was, but I'm also terrible at taking notes and keeping notes. So I just let it ride, and it hasn't hurt me yet.
That's great to know. Yeah, I got a few bottles approaching the end. I might try something like that.
And it's like I said, like I've had it come out like it's fantastic, and like this is amazing. If I knew what I put into it, I could be a millionaire if I could recreate this. But then I put other things into it, and it's kind of like dulled it out a little bit, or it's like drifted, towards more smoky or more sweet or something like that. Naturally, I do sort of miss some things of it, but then like it's always a new adventure.
Well, it's never ruined, right? If
Right,
you-
it's
if
never
goes
ruined.
Too far, you can kind of
Right.
Try
and
to
I-
bring it back. You try to
Right.
bring it back
And like
a
there
little
was
bit,
one
yeah.
part where it was getting a little dull, so I'm like, well, I'm like, I need to buy this whiskey just so that I can top off my affinity
for
level.
science.
It's for science. For the greater good.
So there's 5 more bottles left. Is there any of the 5 that perhaps maybe stand out that you would like to introduce us to, Dan or Andy?
Yeah, let's do one more. What do
Maybe
you-
one more.
Yeah.
Maybe of the 5, maybe one that you particularly like, or
But two
something
more.
special about one, and we can go
I
from
hear
there.
you're one, but I'll raise you to 2.
Okay.
All right,
Twist
we'll
my
do 2
arm.
then.
All right, talk amongst yourselves. I'll go prepared.
Okay. All right. Great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here are 2 guys who wish they sounded as good as me.
For our listeners, Dan and Andy are back in the laboratory preparing the next samples. So I don't know which of the remaining 5 they'll come back with, but I will say that now that we've reached the threshold of bottle number 4, they all go up quite high exponentially in terms of alcohol by volume. We got 51.3, 55-ish as Dan's labeled, and a 46. So I'm excited to try these.
I think it's by design too. You probably don't want to come out of the gate with moonshine, right?
Yeah.
It ruins everything.
Exactly. Somebody sneezes, they're going to burn the hair off somebody's chest.
I had to blow out the candle before we started this. Yeah.
Since you weren't there to stop us,
Okay, they're back from the lab.
we renegotiated.
So Dan and Andy are
and we're gonna
entering
do
the
3.
studio again.
And we have very, very sound.
Yes, this is
Reason
now
for this.
we have science.
All right,
on our
they've
side.
convinced me that we're going to do 3 more. Mike in post will decide. We will decide
That's
how much
fine.
makes to the show, and maybe
This is the
That's
first one.
great.
this is number 1. Okay,
That's number 1.
So that's number 2.
2. Okay.
I placed. And it's if you get confused at all, these 2 you can definitely put
See
up
the
to the
difference,
lights.
yeah. I hope we don't have to drink for every taping that we do.
We might have to. Of the 3 we've sampled so far, or even outside the 3, which do you think might appeal to like a Christopher Walken?
Let's see. I feel like he'd go for the Benromach. I feel like he would.
Which number was that?
Yeah.
That was the 3rd one. I
Third
feel
one.
like
The third one.
it's darker, so it would look good in a glass, look good on film.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's got a little bit of smoke. It's got that depth, that character. It'd be good with a cigar.
Okay. Very cinematic. Yeah, you're painting a picture right now. Well done.
That's my.
But to me, this is a complete fail because you didn't recite this as Christopher Walken.
I'm a terrible
That's what I was
impressionist.
looking forward to.
I'm sorry to disappoint you. If I had that skill, I definitely would have done that.
Dan, what kind of recommendation would you have? It's a terrible Christopher Walken impersonation.
You're looking at the whiskey all wrong.
All right, so I guess we're in for three more.
All right,
what do
so
we got?
so here let me plead the case.
I
first.
also sleep at the Cool Dad Studio, so I'm okay.
So here's the thing. So the next three whiskeys we've got is a sherry cask finished whiskey, which is an important category.
Yeah, I kind of pressured Dan
especially
on this one.
especially for Andy. That's near and dear to his heart. And then we've got a heavily peated whiskey, which is also a very important category, from Isla.
Which we were encouraged that you guys were enticed by the smokiness.
Yes. All right, so you're back in. All right.
Yep.
So
And then finally we have a fantastic, extremely aged whiskey that I love. It's an excellent dessert whiskey. It's like super fruity and syrupy and just delicious.
and as a curator, Dan I trust Dan's curation 100%. He always kind of has like a awesome capstone whiskey at the end of the tasting that just pulls it all together.
He's a pro. Let's jump into the next one. What's this?
I can't
first
wait.
one?
Where are we going?
All right, so the first one up is Glemorangie. This is a 12-year-old whiskey. It is called Lasanta.
I've actually had this before. This is very good. Yes.
This one's kind of easy because it's this very rich red.
It's got
I love the
look
color.
to it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to comment on that.
So this is 43%, just like the last one that we had.
That's delicious.
This is why I keep going back.
Yeah.
This is so good.
So coming off the last one, which was a very strong smell, the smell is much more subdued. This is a smoother, less pronounced scent, I think, going in. But
And that's not necessarily true of all sherry cask whiskeys.
So the sherry cask itself, what it's going to add to it is sort of fruitiness. It's going to add sort of raisins and prunes, plums, sort of red fruits. You'll get that more from a sherry cask.
I'm totally getting that. I mean, sherry is definitely present in this flavor. No, this is delicious. This is very good.
And this whiskey's in the $40-50 range, I think.
Yeah, way more mellow smelling.
And Glenmorangie has a range of finished whiskeys.
Well, the original Glemorangie has I feel like the characteristic of that is that deep citrus.
Yeah.
You get a lot of that orange peel come through on the original, which I think is a 10-year aged whiskey,
10-year-old.
right?
Yep.
So I was going to say, especially with this one, that it's double casked, as Dan was explaining, with the 10-year finish in the bourbon and then the 2 years in the sherry. This is just one key example of like all these different things that go into the making of the whiskey that ends up having such an influence over that really awesome complex flavor that you're getting. Oh yeah, I can think of a Glemorangie that you forgot that we didn't mention, the Signet.
I was going to bring
Signet.
that up.
Glemorangie is like the pinnacle of Scotch whiskey to a lot of people. I think we've had this comment amongst our club members.
To go back to that chocolate note that you got from the Benromach, I believe it was.
Yep.
This Glenmorangie, it's like a chocolate covered, like a dark chocolate covered orange candy. It's not like, not hard candy, but like a sweet like a jellied orange or something like that.
But as a whiskey.
Yes, as a whiskey.
But as a whiskey.
It is gorgeous.
Really is.
If you ever have the opportunity to try it, I highly recommend
All right, keep an eye out for that.
So
right,
anyway, all right, on to the next.
Yeah, I took a second sample. I added a little water to it.
Okay.
It smoothed it all out, and I was able to. I almost detected some floralness to it.
Yeah, that can come
Maybe
through.
more in the smell than the taste, but yeah, this was great.
And I just took another sip, and I put some water in it, and I put the glass down, and I just took another sip, and maybe it's because we're talking about chocolate, but I actually got chocolate on the tail end of it.
See, there you go.
The interesting thing about this too, it's a complete art form. I mean, even what we've talked about here, what goes into something like this, and can you imagine a project that you have to wait 10 years to see how it comes at a minimum, right? and you go, 15, 18, sometimes into the 20-year
so
mark.
true.
Can you imagine waiting 22 years to see what your whiskey tastes like?
Oh yeah.
Well, this is why the Scots take up a lot of their time with golfing.
Yeah, go out and
I had to work that in there.
All right, what are we up to next?
I made pickles a couple times, and I couldn't wait the 10 days. I can't imagine 10 years. I was down here every day, skimming the little vat, and they tasted like kerosene when they were done. I was so angry. It's not even like you can try it along the way and say, oh, I wonder how they're coming. Maybe I can add a little more. You can't do anything. You got to sit there. So I can't imagine 10 years.
Mike is a big Cool Dad shirt fan. I love the callback on that too. I had to work that into this episode. I love it.
That's good stuff. All right, what do we got next?
All right, on to the next one. So now we have Port Charlotte. This is a 10-year-old whiskey. This is 50% alcohol by volume, so a little bit of a jump there. So this whiskey here they measure in ppm phenols, parts per million. So this clocks in about like 55, I think, ppm, and the octomore is, most of them are like 160-ish. I think they finally got up to like 180, or I don't even know.
That's dangerously peated.
There's kind of, in my opinion, there's sort of like, there's a point where it doesn't really matter how much more.
Yeah, there's a sweet
you
spot.
do it.
Right? I mean,
where there's a significant, between like 20 and probably 60, there's a drastic difference. I think once you get much further over that, it's just bragging rights.
It's the same as like those hot pepper guys.
Right.
It's just like you can't even tell. Pepper. Yeah. All right. Well, let's give it a taste.
So
now that's a lot of flavor right there.
mm-hmm.
And that's beyond smoke. We're in peat land, right? Is it?
Right. So depending on where the peat is harvested from, you'll get different characteristics from it, and so that's going to come through the flavors.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. After I added some water, I got more sweetness for sure.
Yeah, I did the same.
What sort of sweetness is it? Is it a fruity sweet, or like a pastry sort of sweet, or what
Yeah, it's more of a creamy sweetness.
Okay.
Visually, it's much lighter.
And so the color comes from usually the casking, but wasn't there some controversy where some companies actually adding color to their?
Some companies do add color to them.
like
Dewar's
gold
definitely
and rich, right?
So there's it's caramel coloring. Dewar's definitely adds color to it. Most blended whiskeys have coloring added to them. At least purported reason for it is for product consistency.
Yeah.
Also, to the story that was driven for a very long time is that age equals quality, and color darkness equals age, which equals quality.
Because the longer it's been sitting in the barrel,
It would
it's
take
going
on
to
more
get more
color.
of that deeper color.
Right. So there are many companies now that advertise that they do not add coloring. So as far as the color for this one, so this is going to be fully bourbon barrel matured. So there's no, which is also going to give you a lighter color whiskey. So also being 10 years old, that's not terribly long for a whiskey, but for a Scotch whiskey, 10 years is not terribly long. I've also learned that it's much more important to just taste the whiskey, because I've had whiskeys that are like straw colored, just light as can be, like a white wine light color. That just packed so much flavor that it's fantastic. And I've had other darker whiskeys that, have been less than impressive, but I've also had some very dark whiskeys that you fully understood why it was so dark, is because it had so much cask influence and so was so rich. Mm-hmm. So it's a part of the story, but it's definitely not the whole story. All right,
That was good.
let's keep.
I
things
tasted a little
moving.
vanilla once I added the water as well.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, for this whiskey for me is hot cinnamon buns. So I get the buttery pastry, the cinnamon, obviously, the icing on top. It's all right there, and then it just has like this gentle cloud of smokiness around it. Like it doesn't seem to, for me, to like influence the main taste. It's just kind of like an ambiance for the whiskey. So I really like this one.
All right. So what do we got next?
And also for those that may be interested, this is about $60, which
Okay.
is a good price, I think, for that.
So you just mentioned cake icing. Immediately, the next one we're about to taste.
Mhm.
It smells like cake icing.
which I don't even
Oh,
know
which
what it
number
is
is
yet,
this?
Rich.
What
Oh, so this
Sorry.
is the Cadenhead's Glenrothes-Glenlivet, 20-year-old.
Woo.
So this, I believe, is
What
number
number?
7 in your lineup. Okay. So this one I opened up a couple years ago. When I bought a house a few years ago, and I had some friends help me move some stuff in, and this was my the celebratory whiskey that I pulled out of storage. So this is 20-year-old. This is it's small batch. I don't know if they say how many barrels it was, but that's what makes it a batch. Four bourbon hogsheads. So it was distilled in 1996, bottled in 2017. The ABV is 51.3%, and it produced 1,314 bottles.
Did you say is hogshead a unit of measure?
It is. It is.
You actually have to explain that now. We're not letting that one slide.
Dude, I'm
so
a
yeah.
data analyst. I'm going to use that at work. So I was like, how many units do we sell? 93 hogheads.
Yes. And they weigh about 3 stone apiece.
Exactly.
It is a unit of measure, and as many years as I've been doing this, I can never remember what the volume of a hogshead is. It is.
All this
So
time I thought
cool.
it was much.
Who
I
cares?
thought it was a full cask versus a half cask, but
So it's
my mistake.
We're fact checking. We're fact checking.
we're I need-
Hogshead.
I
I'm
need
going
closure on
to
this.
check it out.
Dan's looking it up as we speak.
What
You
is
you can edit out the time it takes me to
The
do this.
Googling.
We're going to Google it now.
We actually deliberately leave that in.
All right.
It's part of our charm.
So then you're going to get it all. So hogshead, which is abbreviated HHD, is a large cask of liquid. More specifically refers to specified volume measured in either imperial or U.S. customary measures, primarily applied to alcoholic beverages such as wine, ale, cider, or tea.
Yeah, it says it's 48 inches long and 30 inches in diameter.
yes.
That's my biggest takeaway. All right, let's get to some tasting.
Yeah.
All right. No, wait. We need the volume. So it is 238.7 liters in a hogshead.
This tastes like dessert.
Yes.
I didn't oversell, Dan's
didn't?
curation of being able to
No,
kind of pull together with the pinnacle at the end.
no, you did it. It's just delicious. Yeah, it's definitely sweet. It's definitely desserty, cakey. Like I said, the icing. Absolutely.
Yeah, this is a very well-rounded, smooth, easy drinker. I appreciate that you brought that up. Apparently, this is my first time having it, so I guess I wasn't part of the moving party that helped you.
You didn't show up, though.
Thank your lucky stars, Andy. Thank your lucky stars. You're drinking it today and you didn't even have to move a couch.
Yeah.
So much
All I
better.
got was this black T-shirt.
All right, so this is super refined, and you said it's a small batch. What's a bottle of this coming in at?
So fun story. I don't know.
Oh,
So a few years ago, a mutual friend was going to Scotland, and we just happened to be talking. And I said, "I will give you money if you will bring me back whiskey." I said, "I don't care what you get. Just ask the shopkeeper what they recommend. I will give you $250 right now." I gave him $250. Like, just go in, get what you want. I don't care. I won't be disappointed. Even if you want to buy a tasting while you're there, take my money and buy a tasting.
yeah, you should.
So he did it. He came back, he gave me the whiskeys, and so I got this one and a cask strength 14-year-old Beaumont, which I still have yet to open. The thing is, like, Beaumont is not one that you find in independent bottling release.
So it's very rare.
It's rare. It's like
Yeah.
I've never seen one on this side of the Atlantic.
So is this giving you guys a good idea of the depth of Dan's enthusiasm for whiskey? Because this is every time that we meet as a club, we have multiple stories like this from Dan. And, I think that anyone that is interested in partaking at all in whiskey, we have an encyclopedia of knowledge that's helped us along the journey. And there's a lot of people out there who, that I think you've learned from too.
Oh,
that,
yeah, absolutely.
You can get this information and just kind of keep going down this rabbit hole. and keep coming up with and finding new and awesome flavors.
It's like anything else, any hobby that you get into. I mean, you can do a deep dive, and it's a very deep and rich world out there. And like you said, you were willing to just throw some cash. It surprised me with what you come back, and this is spectacular.
This one's a little peppery.
There's a number of whiskeys I think that have a little bit of that peppery influence.
Yeah.
I often think, like Rich, you and I did a tequila and mezcal tasting once. That's one of the things that, whiskey, I think, kind of counters that pepperiness with some of those really smooth, velvety, a lot of the fruit tones and things like that as compared to the tequila mezcal.
So, a slight side story. Andy and I met in downtown Schenectady at a Mexican place, and we were just chatting. I had been there previously, and the owner came in. He just heard us talking, and I don't think we even paid. Didn't he just start bringing? You got to try this. You got to try this. He was so excited, and his depth of knowledge of tequila was akin to your passion for whiskey. Yeah, and it was a delightful lunchtime experience.
Serendipitous.
Yep.
He was the Dan of tequila and mezcal.
Which we actually have done a tequila and mezcal tasting, which was good. That was so a number of years ago. I became interested in tequila and mezcal, sort of similar to the path with whiskey, where like there are people that talk about it with high esteem. My primary experience was Cuervo, like most people, which is awful.
That's the college experience,
right?
Why everybody hates tequila,
unless you have it in a margarita, it is god awful.
Yeah.
But we're here to help that the same way as people's experience with whiskey was Johnny Walker.
Exactly. So I a friend of a friend, actually Matt's neighbor. He's a big mezcal and tequila guy. I'm like, if you take me to a restaurant and present me with like some sort of guidance, I will pay for our drinks. So we went up to Saratoga. I think we went to Leon's, which I think is now closed. Hole in the wall Mexican restaurant. And he's like, he starts walking me through. He's like, well, I get like ice on the side, and I get a lime, and I do this and do that. And he's like, what do you try? I'm like, you tell me. Like, you pick them out. I don't know these from anything. So we picked out. We tried 4 or 5 of them. And of course, the one that I loved could not be found anywhere outside of Mexico, and that restaurant apparently. And but it started me down the path that there's quality products out there, to be explored, to be appreciated.
It's an art form that people are passionate about. It takes many forms. Yeah, this was great, Dan.
Hey Dan, how many whiskeys / bourbons would you estimate that you've tried over the many years? I mean, you
stumped him. You should see the look on his face right now, Mike.
It's probably in the hundreds, right? I mean, it's amazing to think how many different.
It's got
add another digit to that.
We're hitting 4 digits.
No, I don't think we're in 4 digits, but it's probably comfortably above 500.
Okay.
Of course, I've also gone to
Whiskey Fest
in New York 4 times, I think. I've gone to smaller whiskey events, things like that. Obviously, I've done my own whiskey tastings with the group. I've also participated in Saratoga Whiskey Club, and so I've immersed myself in this for quite some time, and it's it is a lot. There's times where I long for the days when I had less information to try and keep track of.
Well, that's I was a little surprised actually that Dan did not bring the laptop tonight.
I almost did, but I'm like, no, that's just going to be a hassle. So I printed out. I killed some trees and printed out some notes.
We talked about that. Often when we have our club quote unquote meetings, it is a lot of fun to kind of go around the table and everybody throw out their rating 1 to 10. But yeah, Dan tallies every single one of those and tells us at the end of the night, okay, well, it seems like the group favorite was this or versus that. And I know maybe it had to do with that we had this whiskey first versus this one last. It was closer to dinner time. It paired well with that, et cetera, et cetera. Just like we've been talking about all night, is that there's so many different factors that go into it.
Well, and that's a great thing too. I remember first starting with you guys, I was a little intimidated by giving a number. I'm like, I don't know anything, but it's a relative scale, and even if you don't know anything, Like if it tastes good, you're gonna, whatever. And
Right.
and that you made everybody feel comfortable with this is not important at all. We are just seeing if most people kind of like this or whatever.
Right.
And so it was just more of an experiment in what people generally like.
Right. It's just really it's an exercise to encourage people to think about what they're drinking, what they're doing, what they're tasting.
Yeah.
It's not about, pinning someone down, which every time there's a new person in the group, they're like, well, I don't know what number to give. I'm like, it doesn't matter.
And especially with the journey that we as a group have had with the world of whiskey is to try to keep it very non-discriminatory, very low barrier of entry, and kind of anyone come in and inclusionary to be able to get into it and taste it and just like what you like.
It's supposed to be fun and learning, and you guys got it. I mean, the club is very well done, and it's exactly that.
Thank you.
Do you ever feel like an EDM DJ when, like, no matter what tune you throw at them, the crowd goes nuts? Do you feel that sense of reward?
No, I don't.
At, like, a
There's
tasting?
always-
Like tonight, it was a great night. I brought in 4 whiskeys. The crowd loved them. It was such a great night.
No, there is always someone that floats a lead balloon.
The curve buster.
There's always a curve buster.
Son of a gun.
Which is it's part of the deal. It's why we're doing this, so that people can feel free to not like something, not appreciate something. It's not, it's said that there's no such thing as bad whiskeys. There's just whiskeys that are better than others.
All right, guys, we crossed the 2-hour mark, believe it or not.
can get this
Time
down to
flies
like
when
30
you're
minutes,
drinking
right?
whiskey. What's that?
You get this down to like 30 minutes, right?
There's no way we'll get this to 30 minutes.
I don't know. We might roll with it as is. You never know.
But we should probably sum up. This was a great night. This was a new experience to have several people all together kind of hanging out.
Mm-hmm.
And Dan, I can't thank you enough for the preparation that you put into this, the knowledge you bring to it. Top notch. As Mike had mentioned, you sent stuff down there. Andy, who introduced me to all of this, and now I blame him for all the money I spend on this.
You're welcome.
I appreciate the opportunity. I obviously love talking about whiskey. I love sharing whiskey with people. So this was fantastic. I enjoyed it.
So, 2 things. One, I had so much fun. I just realized my microphone's been backwards all night, so hopefully my audio's okay. Number 2, one thing we didn't get to.
Before drinking the whiskey.
Literally before. I've been down here setting up since 6 p.m. and it's still backwards. Such a rookie. But we've had plenty of samples. They've all been excellent. I see number 8 is the World Infinity bottle, which is the house blend. So at some point in the next couple of days, I definitely look forward to giving that a try as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now that is mostly Scotch whiskey, but there's a few stray Japanese whiskeys and some Irish whiskey in there. So there's no American whiskey in there at all. I have a separate bottle for that. So that is the context for that. And I recently added some higher proof whiskey to it, which is why it's up to about 55% ish, down from my thumb gauge of about 52% what it was before. So I hope you enjoy it.
Well, Dan, you've taught me so much. Yeah, you've taught me so much. I probably would have been able to detect all that without you telling me. But I am super appreciative of all this. I probably not even close. But I did really enjoy this. I do feel like I learned something. And certainly I am very interested now in, sampling more and kind of going back and taking some more time to enjoy some of these great samples you said.
Good.
Thanks very much, Dan. Thank you very much, Andy. I had a great time tonight. We certainly appreciate your time. I definitely look forward to having you guys back for maybe a little, check-in segment or something, or a part 2 anytime.
Well, we got to do American whiskey. We got to do Irish whiskey. We have to do world whiskey.
We're going to do a world.
We got to go around the world at some point. Yeah.
This sounds great.
Right.
Once again, guys, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
All right, so we'll end it
Cheers.
here. Are we good, Mike?
Yeah,
We
I
still
think
have some
we're all
more
great.
Yeah, we still have some more poured. Do we have more?
Yeah, we're gonna keep having.
So
whiskey
we're
here.
gonna drink a little bit more, and
Yeah,
but we'll call
go
it here.
ahead.
I think we've got a wrap. And Mike, I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, Dan and Andy, be sure to tuck Rich in before you guys leave.
Will do.
Nighty night.
Cheers.
Thanks, guys. This was great. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.
Hit that, smash that like button or whatever the kids call it.